Just got so busy the last 2 weeks, I didn't have time to send out, some more email to remind them, but I don't know what's going on. I don't know what it is. And I don't really want to deal with that stuff this afternoon, so trying to stay calm, focused.
That's a
I have a
key.
diversity of 1:30, which is good, because that would keep me from thinking about stuff. I think oh, yeah, okay. I think I'm all right.
All right.
I see you walking.
Yep, you're on. But this TV didn't come on.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Why, well, wait a minute. I'll go out and go back in. Why am I doing that?
Yeah, try redialing. All right, I saw the power come on this time.
Yeah, because usually when it does, I get all three screens. So I was just going to say to you, why don't I have everything here? That's why. So I just went out. But now, why are we showing? I can hear my voice too. Why are we showing the front of the room in Dunkirk? And why do I hear my voice repeating itself as much as I love my own voice? Should I leave and come back again?
We are caught in a loop.
Oh, we're caught in a loop.
All right, let's end the call and leave it down for a minute.
Okay.
I think we just dialed too fast.
Oh,
And we'll just let it reset it. Yeah, you're a little too quick on the draw. I'll just watch it. Yeah.
Got in before 11.
We'll let everything clear because it should have gone to the students. I think it was just dialing exactly too quickly.
Now I have a question for you. There's a YouTube video available through my email. Actually, there's two that I'd like to show, but I don't know how I would get access to my email. Well, I can minimize this, can't I?
Oh, yeah, and you can pull up just another tab, and I know the address to your email. If you want me to pull it up.
Well, I'm logged into the computer, so I shouldn't have any trouble getting into my email.
No, it's just that mail or the HTTPS mail.sunigcc.edu.
Well, yeah, but.
For Outlook, you know that
Yeah,
one?
greg@mail.sunnyjcc.edu, and then I have someone from the Palestinian Biodiversity Center. And there's a YouTube video that's short, and then there was another one that show Palestine. Doesn't have any narration, but it's a nice visual presentation. I mean, because I had the chance to be there, but obviously the students haven't, so.
Yeah, as long as you just don't end this stream, you
Right.
can open up another tab, that's fine.
Just by hitting here.
Yeah, that's the one.
All right. Well, don't go away.
Okay, cool.
But then how do I get to my email?
Okay.
I mean, I can go right to YouTube, but.
Yeah, but you don't know the address.
No, you're right. Well, I do actually, I think. No, it's in my email. I'll sign in, you think?
Yeah, so just sign in here.
No, I'm in here for now.
Yeah, go ahead.
What am I doing here?
Here you log in just as you do in your office. This is the web application for
I
Outlook.
mean, just like when I get into my computer period?
Yep.
Password.
How's the audio sound now? Good. Can you give us an audio check? Would you guys say something, please? Morning. Thank you. And Dunkirk?
It's good, I'm here.
Okay, great, thank you. And you can, just don't choose a password,
What do you want me to choose?
never.
Ever?
Okay, and then, just click in the right area here.
Just here?
And then you can search over here.
Well, it's recent.
Oh, is it recent?
Just Some
Okay.
people sent me some stuff. Nuts. Let's go there. I'll make that. Oh, yeah, that is. Yep, yeah. Well, 12 months.
Yep, there's the YouTube.
Yeah, well, that's where it takes me, but that's not the video I want, actually.
Okay.
No. Yeah, you know what's bad about YouTube?
How much other things it wants to show?
No, the one that I want, it doesn't pop up.
Okay, is it also in your email?
No, so when I went to this one, the ones that were over here,
No, does it remember it?
yeah,
And it's not in your email?
no, I took it right out of this.
Okay.
I mean, this is interesting, but the other ones are just short overviews of Palestine.
The best you could do is maybe search overview of Palestine.
Don't know if that's what it was called. Well, which way outputs? That one takes us to. It was just a couple of nifty videos. Yeah, I'll take one. Well, yeah, of course. Weapons, that's exactly what I was trying to do. Yeah, I guess if I want to do that, see, right away, we have all that junk. I mean, exactly what I was trying to.
I know, it's so hard to vet them.
No, I was trying to stay away from that. Oh, wait a minute, no, that one's too short. There were two really nice ones. Just beautiful view. You know, staying away from the conflict and the shooting and everything else. It was just about, these aren't as nice.
Did she send you anything else in that email?
No, see, it's because well, that's what I did. Yeah, see, it's not, it was just two short videos that did an overview of Palestine and an overview of
What did you try overview?
Quds. Yeah, but I don't think it was called overview. And with YouTube, yeah, well, I can try it, but I don't know what was There's that one that's only a minute long. That was too long. No, it's just under attack. It's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. If I go back to that one with the museum from him. It wasn't, because he was doing biodiversity here, so.
There's museum, older videos.
Yeah. No, it's when I hit this one of the museum, it pulled up over here the two that I really liked.
Not in this case.
Yeah, and I don't, even if I went up to my office, it wouldn't do it, it would still, because there's no way to show,
Right,
I would think.
sometimes it tracks that.
Well, sometimes I would find stuff on YouTube that I wanted to use, and then you go back in it and it brings up something else.
Yeah, the algorithms are different.
Yeah, and I didn't bother to record, and that's too bad, because I really like those. Oh, well. It's not meant to be.
YouTube is hard.
What?
So yeah, unless you get those addresses and store them.
Yeah, I got distracted again by the crap on the outside world. Nope, did I move? Oh, wait, here we are. Sorry about that, I was trying to find something I could show you and it didn't work out. But there'll be other opportunities. There were two really nice videos that showed how beautiful Palestine actually is. And then a really nice friendly video about Jerusalem, which in Arabic is Al-Quds. I'll just say something about that. I'm a little distracted today. I wish I was just in my regular clothes. But oh well. So let's see, Holy Ann, Dunkirk. And then again, I'm assuming we lost Isabella, but you guys don't know her? So let me just briefly put up the notes from last time before I do anything else. So just to refresh your memory, we talked about the narratives, the one from Zionism and then the one from the Palestinians. And then I said, well, Zionism is even more complex because there's dueling narratives within Zionism. And I talked about the historical one that is not the dominant one, and then spent a lot of time on the more dominant one that, to a great extent, can explain a lot of the actions of Israel and the United States as its major ally. And that took us a little time, and that's as far as I got in my stuff. So before I do anything else, let me ask if anybody has a question, comment, concern, or anything they would like me to clarify. We think we're okay? We're okay in Dunkirk and Olean? Guys all right? You guys are all right? Okay. So you can see this, I didn't take us any further into the 20th century, but I kind of stopped just around World War I, suggesting to you that what eventually does happen after World War II is what we call settler colonialism, whereby the people who live in Palestine are pushed out of the way, and then people from Europe and America come in, mostly as Jewish immigrants, and establish what eventually becomes the State of Israel. And when we talked about that, you could see at the end, there was this attitude among the dominant theory of Zionism that half the time it would be, well, there are no people there. There are no Palestinian people. They're Arabs. I think we talked about them being fungible, that all Arabs are the same, and that moving the Palestinian people out of Palestine is no big deal because they can go to Egypt or Syria or any other number of Arabic countries, whereas if we're Jewish, we have no such place to go to, and so it's either there or it's no place. And since these Palestinians, these Arabs are heathens, they're inferior, they're uncivilized, they need saving. When you read some of the stuff that comes out of the dominant theory of Zionism, it's this idea that we are doing them a favor because they will become civilized, they will become more prosperous, and part of it is just a need to justify what they're doing. And so it takes a view of Palestinian people that I would suggest to you is totally and completely inaccurate, which is one of the reasons why I was trying to find these two nice little videos. One, there's no commentary, but one is maybe a few minutes long showing how beautiful Palestine really is. And also one showing the city of Jerusalem, which from the perspective of Palestine, I mentioned this briefly, but it's worth noting. In Arabic, Al-Quds means Jerusalem. You'll hear Palestinians say Palestine or Jerusalem, I should say. But Al-Quds is the Arabic word to describe Jerusalem. And all Al-Quds translates to is holy place. And in fact, there is an Al-Quds University, which is Jerusalem University, but they prefer, they use the Al-Quds name is because it tells you that it's a Palestinian university. So I'm not here to teach Arabic, but sometimes we will learn Arabic. You might get confused if you see the phrase Al-Quds. It just means Jerusalem. So, two things that I wanted to talk about this morning now that I don't have access to the videos. One is that eventually we get into a simulation involving us playing the role of the Palestinian Authority, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And then also that National Geographic article from 1914, which is contemporary to this stuff, but instead of saying that Palestinians are uncivilized or heathens or inferior, it's just a neutral look at what National Geographic explorers and authors found when they went into Palestine before World War I, way before there was an Israel, and discovered culture that's quite rich. It's very rural, it is poor, but there's a culture there. People living on the land, farming the land, living in peace with, mostly Muslim living in peace with Jews and Christians, and all this stuff changes all of that. Suddenly this area that was at peace, although not necessarily that prosperous, suddenly becomes a place of conflict. And even when I was trying to find those YouTube videos that I was looking for, typically if you type in Palestine, you immediately get people walking around with guns. Which is not to say there aren't people with guns and there isn't conflict, but it ignores all the other stuff where there's universities and culture and language and markets. And the one in Jerusalem shows all these smiling young women because there's a vibrant marketplace, and it's not all doom and gloom. It's in many respects, especially for me in East Jerusalem, the Palestinian part, just will run down because the Israelis don't take care of it, but a friendly place where people go on with their daily lives, raising children, getting married, taking care of older families, sending kids to school, going to work as best as they can in a difficult situation. So I try at times to get away from the conflict, the doom and gloom, because to a great extent, what we consider this ongoing constant conflict, the seeds of it are laid in World War I and through the dominant Zionist narrative that I bring up here. And in fairness to the Zionists, the Palestinians weren't particularly well prepared because they had their own problems and issues. The Zionists had a leadership structure that was ready to go. The Palestinians themselves were badly divided. Because the other thing to avoid is certainly Jewish people are not monolithic, nor are Palestinians. Zionists aren't monolithic. We've got at least two theories. But they got their act together so that they could get what they wanted. The Palestinians, unfortunately, had conflicts among themselves, and just even if you look at it today, part of the problem is they have no cohesive leadership, and that constantly causes them problems. But this goes all the way back to this period. So, so any questions, comments, especially about clarifying anything that I wrote here for you and comparing the two themes? Are we okay? Okay, well, at some point during the course of the course, we're going to be doing something called an International Negotiations Project. At some point, I'll be sharing pieces of this with you. This is called the International Negotiation Modules INP Project Scenario. You can see it's dated spring 2020. So this comes out every spring, usually in January while we're on break. This is a project started by California. Gosh, I can't even remember. And then we were the first New York college to get involved. So what this is an online simulation of international negotiations whereby community colleges from across the United States, and we have one in Italy, even though they don't have community colleges, playing the role of different countries or organizations. My world politics class here will be playing the European Union and the North Koreans, and then when we get going, we will be playing the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority issues. And you can see on the bottom, developed by Dr. Joyce Kaufman. She's a professor emeritus of political science, now affiliated with the University of Maryland, where all this started. But she and I started working while she was still in California, where she actually does live. And most of the time associated with Whittier College in Los Angeles. Joyce is retired, but she's still working on this project. This is something she cares about deeply. And she's a colleague, but also a very good friend, and she has been to Jamestown Community College. So she has actually been to both the Olean and the Jamestown campus. And she's quite amazing. So every January, she brings us up to date on the world situation based on the countries that are playing the role. And I haven't had a chance actually to look at what she says about about Palestine. But I'm sure she says something about it. And at some point, I will make copies of that and then get it to Olean, Dunkirk, and of course, bring it to class here. Where she will describe what her understanding of what's going on in Palestine as of January. And as I said, I haven't even had a chance to read it, so I'm kind of looking forward to it because she's extremely knowledgeable. And then the other thing she does, well, let me just show you this. Section 2 of her document is general international conditions. She talks about what's going on in the world, very up to date. And then, of course, at some point in the document, she will get to Palestine. And as I mentioned, I haven't had a chance to look at this myself. So just bear with me. Got too many things going on, especially today. And of course, this looks like the day that I can't find anything, or my copier stopped at page 43. Oh well. I just wanted to make you aware of this. Seems like the day 9 o'clock went just fine. What's going on now? So, well, anyways, I thought I would also introduce you to the issues that we're going to be discussing. But my copier stopped tricks on. Oh well. So just to be aware of this, sorry about that. We can do that on Wednesday. What I'd like to do today is to talk about that National Geographic article that I keep bringing up. That's an attempt to explain what Palestine looked like at the start of World War I. And we can take a look at some of what's in here. We'll get back to the simulation and maybe the videos. Well, Wednesday. Sorry about that. I have some still official positions in the outside world, and I'm almost close to the point of quitting because it just isn't worth the stress. You can always tell I got official business because I got a tie on it, and I get flustered. But this too shall pass. So, again, this is from the National Geographic magazine, 1914, entitled Village Life in the Holy Land. And I only stumbled across this as, sometimes in academic research, you could be very well organized and dig very deeply. And as I was over the summer researching stuff at the University of Illinois on a grant for my course in Palestine. And this, despite the experts and my best efforts, this never popped up. And then I went to the Museum of Palestinian Peoples in Washington because it just opened. And I came across this article and I thought, wow, this tells me a lot about what Palestine was before all the trouble started in 1917 because of the war. And so this is why I found this particularly interesting. And I'll just read the summary at the top. It says, a description of the life of the present day inhabitants of Palestine, showing how in many cases their customs are the same as in Bible times. So it clearly refers to present day inhabitants of Palestine without calling them Palestinians. And I read this and made some notes, and I will probably go to this and then go to the path so that we can all have a sense of what was going on before the changes of the last 100 years. The opening paragraph, and I'll see if I can make that bigger. If you can't read it, don't worry, because I will make some notes to share. But then maybe you can read it. It can be fairly large. Can you see that okay here and in Olean and Dunkirk? Actually, it's clear. Yeah. It's clearer than I thought it would be. Excuse me, so it's describing Palestine. Palestine, often called the Holy Land, so my sister-in-law always calls it. She's very Catholic. is in a general way familiar to all of us from our study of the Bible. Now, of course, this is making an assumption that those of us in all three locations had studied the Bible some way, either because you went to church, maybe you still go to church, maybe because you had a Bible at home, or maybe, you know, wherever your influence was. So it sort of makes an assumption that we know the Bible at least a little bit. And again, I don't ask people to identify themselves, but typically here in Jamestown, Olean and Dunkirk, although there's a little more variety in Olean, I'm assuming that everybody has sort of a Christian background. You know, you don't have to tell me in the room if you want to tell me privately, because, you know, your religion is your own business. But basically, if you were raised a Christian, regardless of which denomination, I think it's a fair assumption that all of us have some familiarity with the Bible, because the Bible also has worked its way into general discourse, because this was a Judeo-Christian country. And even if you're Muslim, which I don't know if anybody is, but you know, the Quran makes reference to a lot of things that are in the Bible. So unless you were raised as an atheist or a heathen sort of sounds judgmental, or not particularly religious, you know, but so if there's gaps in your biblical knowledge, you can let me know privately, or you can let me know there, or you can ask questions. So it's somewhat familiar. Few, however, realize that the manners and customs which prevailed there in biblical days are still unchanged, even after an interval of 3,000 years. So I mentioned this book that I have here. That's Palestine, a 4,000-year history. And if this was done in 19, so this is 3,000 years. This is another scholar basically saying that for 4,000 or 5,000 years, depending on how you can date the beginning, there is a Palestinian people and a Palestinian history. And when the dominant form of Zionism says, well, they're just like all the other Arabs, and it's no big deal to move them from Palestine to Egypt, or Palestine to Jordan, or wherever else they want to send them. I was reading a book yesterday about Palestine, kind of like what I spend a lot of time doing. And when this debate came up in the United States in the late 1940s, when one of the Zionists said, well, you know, Arabs are fungible, an Arab is an Arab is an Arab, whether they call themselves Palestinians or something else, so you can move them with ease. A congressman, I don't know where he was, I think he was from Virginia, and he said, well, that would be like saying to me as a Virginian, I could move to Texas with ease. And he said, that doesn't make any sense to me. But he was one of the voices that wasn't listened to. And it's typical of an Indian is an Indian in Indian, so whether they live in what we call Chautauqua County, or they live across the Mississippi, it doesn't really matter because all Indians are the same. Well, I think we may be at the point where we understand better. But the land today is inhabited by three distinct classes. The Bedouins are nomads, a wandering, war-loving race. Now I don't know if they're war-loving, but this author has his own biases. There actually are still Bedouins roaming around. They're nomads. They don't stay in any one place. They move from place to place. That's just the way they live. You know, they hunt and they gather, and they live a very primitive life, but that's their choice. And then you got the Fellahin, who are the agriculturalists, shepherds, and village dwellers. So most of Palestine was, and to a great extent still is, an agricultural economy. It's noted for olives, olive oil, sheep, you know, lamb, and soap that's made out of olive oil. And so I went to Nablus, which is a very old city in Palestine, where they literally still make the soap out of the olive oil the old-fashioned way. They press the juice out of the oil, mix it in with fat, and there's this very old warehouse where they lay the soap out on the stone floor. It's huge. And then they divide it into blocks and they wait for it to dry out. Then they cut it up, and there's another room where there's 3 elderly gentlemen who wrap the soap in paper. They don't use machines. None of this is still done the old-fashioned way. And while we were there, the elderly gentleman offered us the opportunity to see if we could wrap the soap as fast as he could. Some of my colleagues tried, they couldn't. And we were watching this guy. He was amazing. They've done studies and they've tried to do it with machines, and these guys were all faster. And they're just sitting there. So I was hoping they'd give me souvenir soap, but they didn't. And part of the reason why is that this soap is one of their major exports because it's highly prized by quite wealthy people all throughout the European Union who attest to the ability of this soap, because it's all natural, done the old-fashioned way, made out of olive oil, to be better for your complexion. And so they don't have a lot of costs because there's no mechanization. I mean, it's fascinating to watch. It's like going back in time. I don't know if it would be 3,000 years ago, but it was a long time ago. And they're still doing it, and they make a lot of money off it. It's one of their best money-making opportunities. We go into this very old building, and when you go up the stairs, you have to be careful because there's soap residue all over the place. You know, it's not the United States with handrails. So, and the place is booming. And all of that comes out of the agricultural world. And you'll notice that they lived in villages. They would live in the village, and then they would go out to their land that they farmed. It's kind of the way they still do it. It's not like in the United States, especially around here, where you might have a farm and a house, and they're a long way off from other people. They would go back to the village at night, and then in the day go out and do the farming, and then come back. It's very similar if you've been up to Quebec. In Canada, it's the same approach to agriculture. It's very, the farms are all individually owned. It's private ownership. The neighbors help each other out, but when they go back home at night to the village life, it's a social culture. You don't live on a farm in isolation, which is sort of the American image, and even the Western Canadian image. But the French vision, the Palestinian vision is, well, yeah, you have your own land, you go out and farm it, but then, you know, you come back into the village where your family is, and things are very social. So there was a well-developed village life as well as a well-developed agricultural economy. And then it talks about the Madaniye who live in the towns and cities such as they were. None of these cities were huge, but there were cities. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, the Palestinians were known for olive oil. The other thing they were noted for was citrus. Middle Eastern oranges are highly prized throughout Europe. The problem is that after the creation of Israel and the movement of the Palestinian people, Palestinians were able to keep a lot of the olive trees, although a lot of them unfortunately were chopped down. But the citrus land was taken away from them. And so what used to be called Palestinian oranges are now Israeli oranges shipped out of the city of Haifa, which basically was a Palestinian town. Now it's a Jewish or Israeli town. And it is a very lucrative business for the Israelis. So if you go into Europe and you get an orange, most likely it's an Israeli orange, which originally belonged to the Palestinians. And so when that was taken away from them, it was a highly developed agricultural economy. So when the dominant Zionists try to argue that there was no civilization, there was no economy, these people were poor, well, a lot of them were poor, you know, but they depended on agriculture, which of course is dependent on weather. And water is scarce in the Middle East. But it's one of the other reasons I wanted to show you on video. There are parts of the Middle East, Palestine, that are quite green. And then there's other parts that are quite brown because it's the desert. And so you have to be careful about your use of water. But the Palestinians over time learned how to use it in such a way that they didn't waste it. And they grew these phenomenal olive tree orchards and citrus orchards. And the citrus was taken away. So, and then there were some people who lived in the towns and cities, like Al-Quds, because that's a holy site. So, the culture was diverse enough for this author, who had no particular interest other than recording what he saw, to say that this has been around for thousands of years, and that the culture was well developed enough to have three classes of people, and they were interconnected and intermingled. And he does make a little judgment down here, because if you notice, it says, I don't think Mr. Whiting was a Zionist, but when I talk about that attitude, notice what it says in the second paragraph. With the advent of civilization. So apparently he's recording what he sees as civilization, but then is saying that, well, you know, these people still were kind of primitive. Because what aligned with the advent of civilization, the townspeople are fast losing their ancient customs and quaint customs. I mean, this is clearly someone, you know, you regard customs as quaint. That's basically demeaning. But the villagers adhere to both far more tenaciously. Still, no one knowing the country can fail to see that a time is not far distant when many of their interesting and long-lived habits of life will be things of the past. So they're becoming civilized, and they're going to lose a lot of what made them distinctive. On the other hand, it's also pointing out that there was a culture, it's been there a long time, and these people are distinct. And then it does have some pictures. These are people mixing mortar for the roof of their houses. It's got a little caption. When a house is ready to roof over, all the villagers, both men and women, lend a helping hand. So one of the things it's pointing out, again, what I said earlier, it's a collective culture. And in the village, you live as a community. And that's why it says, when a house is ready to roof, all lend a hand. And notice it says, it's not segregated, it's not men's work to build the roof. It's men and women's work. In this picture, we see the men mixing the mortar and placing it on boards, which are passed along by the women to the men working on the roof. So the women are passing it along, but nonetheless, they're an integral part of the whole process. There is a difference between the men and women, but they all take part in building the village. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about the house itself, and it's interesting, but I didn't think it was that interesting. And you can see that I underlined stuff. And he goes, the land, not the people, conserves the old customs. One cannot become even tolerably acquainted with Palestine without perceiving that it is the land that has preserved the ancient customs. So the land is very important. So when you move people off of this land, that even he is saying is what's kept these customs alive, and you move them someplace else off of this land, and you notice he's got the land in italics, it's the centrality of the land that they have occupied for 3,000 years. How can you justify moving them and saying, well, if they go to Iraq or they go to Syria, it's the same thing. This guy's coming around saying, no, it's not. It's present-day inhabitants who have nothing in common with the modern Jews who crowd Jerusalem. Sorry about this. There's some more pictures. This is one where they're roofing. You can see the woman helping the man. And then some more stuff. I mean, they built out of stone. I mean, this is a pretty elaborate house. And again, this is 1914. They're not doing it with machinery. They're doing it by hand. It's hard for me to understand how you could say there's no culture. On this one, it says, each village has an upper room or guest chamber. During the summer, the villagers often substitute the shade of some large tree for this room. The guest chamber or tree is the gathering place for all the village men, where many spend the evening or the entire day when they have nothing with which to occupy themselves, for sociability is one of their characteristics. But to go back to the earlier quote, kind of hard to do this, but it's present-day inhabitants who have nothing in common with the modern Jews who crowd, which I think is a very interesting word, with the modern Jews who crowd Jerusalem are still perpetuating the life of Abraham, the prophet. You know, we talked about the three Abrahamic faiths, and the customs and ways of the people who lived here at the time of Christ. So, you know, that would be 2,000 years. But if you read this article carefully, he keeps talking about how these people have been there for a very long time. This is their land. The land has shaped their life. So to take that away from them is awful. And you'll find this replete, like I mentioned at the time, I said to somebody over there, well, you're well educated. Why do you put up with this? Why don't you leave? And the response was, well, this is our land. We're not going to let them take it away from us. I'm not sure in the United States we have that same attachment. We may have at one time, but I don't think so. You know, Americans tend to be highly mobile. To know the heart of the land, to have learned the hospitality of its people, which is always offered, I can attest to that in the 21st century. No matter how primitive or simple, makes it easy to picture. And then it talks about Mary and Joseph. And, you know, for those of you who are Christian, of course, we just had Christmas, and we often talk about, you know, that Mary had to give birth to Jesus in a stable, and we have pictures of it being, you know, straw and dirty and just this awful place. Again, no offense to, it's kind of like when Christians talk about the crucifixion, they talk like Jesus was the only one crucified. Well, in fact, the Romans crucified thousands of people. Jesus got caught up in that. That was their normal way of killing people. Pretty awful and brutal. And then, of course, you know, well, I guess Jesus was on a hill, but the Romans typically would put this along the roads, so that as you were traveling, you would see, don't even think about revolting against Rome, because if you do, and this could go on for miles of crucifixes, where people are slowly strangulating to death, saying, this will happen to you, so don't mess up. So crucifixion wasn't unusual, as horrible as it was. But then he does the same thing with the stable. It goes, such a use of the roue or stable portion of the house by human beings is not the exception, but an everyday occurrence. So the fact that Mary and Joseph and Jesus had to go to the stable, you know, and again, please take this in the spirit that it's offered. I'm not criticizing Christianity. It's just that Christianity often talks about, we'll see how poor he started out. in the context of that culture, that was the norm. They wouldn't have, I think if they came back and looked at us and said, what are you talking about this poor? A lot of kids were born in the stable. It was no big deal. Because it's the rule, not the exception. You can occasionally find men working their primitive looms there, or the mother preparing the food, or doing her little sewing near the door, where there is more light on a dark winter's day. So actually, at times, the stable was preferable to the house. Because if I go back, for example, to this picture of a fairly substantial house, you'll notice there's a tiny little window. Now, things have changed there, obviously, it's 2020, but he's talking about a culture that has been there for a very long time. And a lot of sometimes what's quoted as so unusual really isn't. So we have all perhaps noticed that in the two gospel narratives where the birth of Jesus is dwelt upon, neither of them mentions a stable barn or anything equivalent. Well, Matthew, speaking of the wise men, says, quote, and when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother. Now, unquote. The house would have included the stable. The barn, it's not like if you go out on a farm, if you guys are living in rural areas, and you see a barn like with the Amish separate from the house. When Matthew's talking about the house, he most likely was including the barn. So again, this is not that unusual. Many of these dwellings, placed as they are on ancient sites, those ancient, are built over old caves or caverns, which then become part of the house, the lower or stable portion. And so if you ever get to go to the mosque where Muhammad allegedly ascended into heaven, Dome of the Rock, there is a big rock. He allegedly ascended into heaven on his horse from that spot. And under the rock is in fact a cave. And that rock and that cave would have been incorporated into a structure, typically a house, and you can go into the cave. It's very hot in there. I had to bed down, but it's lit up because it's a holy site. And you're, as long as you're respectful, of course, you take your shoes off in the mosque. You're more than welcome in there. And then, you know, for those of us, again, who are raised in a Christian culture, perhaps putting a cave inside of a house of worship would seem a little strange, not so much in Jerusalem, because the same thing happens in the Christian sites. But this would have been normal, because where you have not a lot of building materials and all the work that it takes to build one of these stone houses, you would incorporate caves and caverns into your structure. So this is a house of worship, and having a cave in there is quite normal. And I've been to the Dome of the Rock. It's a beautiful mosque, and then in the middle there's a cave and a rock. And you know, if you were a Palestinian, for thousands of years you built your house because the rock and the caves were incorporated into the structure. And the stable or the barn was part of your home, and it wasn't a bad place. I'm trying to, you know, like Americans a lot of times have decks. I have a back porch covered, like tables, chairs, and barbecue. I mean, you know, in the summertime, a lot of us, and this is like perpetually summer, you know, a lot of people have you can drive around, you can see some very elaborate decks where people go all out. And so I'm trying to think of, that would be the modern day American equivalent. A lot of people live on their decks all summer long, unless it's raining, but even if it's raining, they have it covered. And you have all kinds of amenities out there, and if you're well off, you have all kinds of stuff out there, music. And so this isn't that strange. I'm running out of time. I always get all heated up and then I gotta stop. So I certainly want to still work with the article. We'll probably do that, and then we'll go to the stuff in the simulation. Because I find this article very insightful. And it's not talking about people shooting each other in conflicts and all these other scenarios we have in our mind when we think of Palestine. These are people just living their lives, like most of us. So I guess I'll see you on, so what? Maybe I'll be gone or by Wednesday. I'll be back in a real close. Yes.